Welcome to the Asking for a Friend podcast series. This podcast goes along with a series of messages that Pastor Alex is doing where we are tackling some of the big questions that we all have. We may not have all the answers, but we are committed to walking with one another through the uncertainties of life. Let's get into the conversation.
How's it going?
Good.
You guys doing all right?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me for another one of our podcast episodes that goes along with the series, Asking for a Friend. So we have a few questions. And I figure let's just start with maybe some of the ones that are not so intense, and then we'll get a little bit more intense, okay? The first question that I want to ask you guys is, it has to do with, I think one of the biggest hurdles that people face before stepping into a church. The word hypocrite comes to mind. Here's a question. Why would I want to go to a church full of hypocrites who look down on me for my sins, all the while doing the same or worse? So I think it's a phenomenal question. And what would you say to somebody who is struggling because they know the junk that's happened, and maybe they've been hurt in church before, and they've lost hope. They don't really feel like the church works anymore. Organized religion is no good. Why would I want to go to a church where they're just going to judge me when they themselves do the same kind of things? So who wants to go first?
Go for it,
Sure,
Shane.
let's do it.
Go for it.
I guess my first thought on that is, and this is even one of the things that I try to do, because that's a question I ask regularly. Like every time I walk into a church, I'm there's always that hesitancy. I'm like, man, what's somebody gonna think? What's somebody gonna say? Someone who may know my story, know different parts of my past, like that's heavy. And the first thing that I have to do is look in the mirror. Before I begin to say, hey, what anybody else thinks of me, what you think of me, what do I think of myself? What am I currently living? Am I being a hypocrite? And even beyond that, like, who am I pursuing? And if I'm pursuing Jesus, if I'm trying to be more like Jesus, then what somebody else has to say becomes irrelevant. Mm-hmm. It's still hard. It doesn't make it less hard. Like, sometimes it's hard to walk into a place and be like, man, I'm being judged for. One of my best friends, he said, man, I walked into a church every single time. I'm the biggest guy there, and I'm full of tattoos, and everybody looks at me like I am the worst guy in the world, and he's got one of the biggest hearts I know. And so it's being confident that you are a child of God, and doing your best to find a church where you're loved, regardless of all of the junk in your past, and can do the same for others.
Vivian?
Yeah. I think that's a really good, it's a good starting point to say, like, if other people are judging you, then their priorities probably aren't super, their priorities aren't straight.
Off.
Yeah, they're a little off. So realizing, one, that Jesus is not condemning you. So, nobody else has a leg to stand on. And I would also say, if you're at a place where people are judging you pretty severely, then maybe that's not a great place to be.
Right.
I mean, there's a church for everybody, right? We always say that we're not in competition with other churches. It's, we're all on the same team. So if something doesn't fit, then,
it's okay to try other churches. It's okay to try other churches.
It's okay to look for that community and just recognize that Jesus is not condemning you, so no one else has that either.
So what do you tell somebody that maybe is not even a believer? So you're looking at it from the perspective of a Christian, but what if somebody's listening to this, they have questions, or, maybe they showed up, maybe they came across a podcast, and they're not really a Jesus follower. Maybe they're on the fence, but they've seen what churches have done in the past, or even pastors have done. What do you tell somebody who's not a believer?
I think one of the best examples I have is our conversation, 6 months after I started going here. And you may say, no, that's probably more for a believer. I don't think it is. I think it's for anybody. But you'd ask me to be a greeter. And I looked at you and I said, what happens? Because I was pretty hurt at that point in my life. What happens if somebody walks up to the church, sees me greeting, and turns and walks away? I'm like, that would crush me because I'm being judged by the Christian walking up or whatever. And you said, if that's their reaction, then this isn't the church for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the starting point for the non-believer is, hey, find the place where you are loved, where you are met, because I think they exist. I think it exists here, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of being a full-on Jesus follower to being a full-on I want nothing to do with them. Find the place where you are loved and met right where you are, and find people to walk alongside you.
Yeah, because I would say there are, whether you're a Christian or not, it just as far as people goes, like there are judgmental people and then there are non-judgmental people, whether you're a Christian or not. And so those communities do exist, and I would just say, seek that out if that's something that people are looking for, if they're wanting community, even if they're not a believer. It does exist. Sometimes it can be hard to find, and I would often say that those communities that are more judgmental, those are the louder ones, typically, or those are the ones that get the most airtime. You say this, I want to be known for what I'm for, not for what I'm against. And a lot of times that negative, what I'm against, that's what ends up being really loud.
So let's get real. Okay. Do you think that there is such a thing as a church that does not judge? Let me even actually dive into this a little bit deeper. Is there a human being that does not judge? Like if I'm like let's be super vulnerable. Let's just say that nobody's listening to this. It's just the three of us talking, and I'm just challenging your thought process. And I know my thoughts, so I'll be the first one to tell it. I judge constantly, so it's a fight that I have to, But is there such a thing as a church that doesn't judge? Is there such a thing as a person that doesn't judge? Or what's the difference? Shane?
Well, I don't judge, so I don't know.
You've got this figured out. Okay, fine. No, I would say my natural tendency is to be judgmental, because you only know what's in your own brain and your own thoughts, right? So you see somebody do something that you wouldn't do, and you're like, what are you doing? That's crazy. That's don't be stupid. Like,
right.
It's very, very easy to be judgmental. I think it's what you do with it.
Right.
And do other people know that you're being judgmental? And are you giving that to Jesus? And are you saying, like, okay, I may not agree with this, I may not understand, but I'm still gonna love you anyways? Like, it's kind of what you do with it. I don't know. That's my.
No, that's good. That's good.
But,
you say you don't judge, Shane.
That was the joke.
But I know you, and that's the problem. That's I know you judge religious people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Never.
No, absolutely. That was a joke. That was definitely said in jest. I definitely judge. Is there a person or a church or an organization that doesn't judge? No. I mean, absolutely not. I think there's definitely a fine line, even too, as an individual, between being discerning and being judgmental. So I guess my two thoughts would be, one, it goes back to what I started it with, is I guess they both go hand in hand, but one is look in the mirror. Let's evaluate myself first. If I have a genuine understanding of who I am, it's a whole lot easier to come to a table humbly with humility. And then the other thing I would say goes back to the verse that is taken out of context every time I ever hear it, which is, don't judge. That's what the Bible says, right? Don't judge. And the Bible doesn't say don't judge by itself. The Bible says don't judge lest ye be judged. That's that great King James right there. Did you see that come out? Look at me.
I'm about to judge you.
There you go. No, but then that passage, I couldn't even tell you where it's at, but that passage goes on to say, it's the same passage that talks about the speck in the log, where it says, before you worry about that log in your brother's eye, take care of your speck in your own eye.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can really and truly be honest with ourselves about where we are and who we are,
that's good.
It's way easier not to judge somebody else. And even beyond not judging, like even internally, it's hard. It's if I have a true understanding of who I am, I'm going to come, like I said, I'm going to come to the table a whole lot more humbly. And I can be like, I know where I am. So even though I don't necessarily have the same issue that Vivian has, my issues are far worse. So.
Yeah, self-awareness. I think that is
that's a good word, yeah.
key in a Christian's walk in every aspect of life is self-awareness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge. For me, when I find myself judging someone, I try to go back to a place where I know I've messed up and where God has shown me grace. And I think it's not that we're not supposed to judge, is that we're not like, and what do you mean by judge, right? So when I use that word, well, are you the prosecuting attorney? Are you the jury? And are you the judge with the final sentencing? Well, the answer is no. And so, but I think there's a difference between discerning and actually judging. Now, I do believe that in all kinds of circles, whether it's a church, a business world, people will look at you and they will immediately put you in a category, in a box. And so I'm not really sure that you can get away from not being judged in every shape, in every circumstance, in every community. But I think that what you can do is be a part of a community that at least tries, and and their culture has been taught to be, like you said, self-aware that, hey, like one of the things we say at the church is no perfect people allowed, right? Like, and I feel like I can say that because I'm not perfect, and I need lots of God's grace in my life, and so is there ever a time where it's okay to judge?
I mean, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion. I think so.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the reference, but I do think that there's a place for it. I think there's a passage that's in my brain that's basically saying that we are allowed to judge and critique within our own circles of Christians. We hold each other accountable to what we believe to be a high standard of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so when there's people within our own circles that are not portraying Jesus accurately or misrepresenting Jesus or are not leading, properly, or we hold our pastors and leaders accountable. We need to, and we see that a lot of times where we don't sometimes. And I don't think that we're called to judge the world, our outside world. I think rightly we can judge within our own circles, and not with the spirit of condemnation, not with the spirit of nasty tearing each other down, but just with loving critiques to say, hey, let's redirect towards our prime example of Jesus.
What are some ways that people are judged in church?
Well, can we back up?
No, yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's a couple places where I just kind of want to
go for it.
Maybe not question, but just clarify. I think there are some places in the world that we have to judge, but I think defining what judge means, it really is, hey, here's a standard, and here if you're on this side of the standard versus this side, and all of those things. And I think one of those places as a dad is, if I'm going to do my best, I'm going to judge, if you will, my children and keep them separated from someone who may be on.
Yeah, you don't, like, you take your kids to a birthday party and, let's say they're, she's a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and you take her there, or even, let's say 10-year-old. I think that'll fit the analogy a little bit better. And if it's an environment that's not good, you want to judge that, or dropping them off at daycare or something like that. And that's why I said defining the word judge, right? Where it's not only are you putting the person on trial, not only are you the prosecuting attorney, not only are you the the jury, but you're also the judge, and you give the final sentence. And I think that's up to God. I don't think that we ever give a sentence. I don't, regardless. We
not
don't
an
say
eternal sentence for sure. There may
definitely
be
not
a
eternal.
temporary sentence that I give here on earth.
Well, no, you can remove yourself from the equation, but I don't think that it's up to us to say this is the penalty that I think you need to pay for your sins. I just don't think that. I don't see that in the Bible. I think that there is a lot of discernment where you see. I mean, if it's blatant sin and it's hurting other people, you want to keep people's. I mean, if it's within the context of a church, you want to keep things safe. But I don't see, in my opinion, I don't see where it's our job to give the final sentence to somebody.
Yeah, I think this is where
I think the government can do that. But I don't know, just a thought.
No, I think what you're
maybe I'm off.
You're differentiating between is like I think. I would call what you're talking about discernment, like discerning what is a wise situation and what is smart and what is, but like, I would say like, okay, I'm not going to hold the world as it were to this, the same standard that I hold other believers to, or even like judging people for their past or for their, for their mistakes and stuff like that.
I think that's the difference between the eternal consequence and the eternal sentence, which is, it is not for me to say whether or not you are going to heaven. That is only for God to do. However, on a temporary sentence, like take for instance, an individual has been guilty of financial crimes, white-collar crimes, if you will. Their temporary sentence that I would put on is I'm not going to hire them to be a bank teller. But that doesn't mean my sentence is that I'm not going to interact. I mean, I'm still going to love them. I'm still going to meet them where they are. But I think we have to put, it's a conversation that I feel like goes real deep, real fast. When it comes to legalities, and there are some things in our past that keep us from doing things in our present and in the future here on earth that somebody is sentencing, but it all comes down to what that standard is. And so without even going down that road, to go back to the other thing that you mentioned was amongst believers, there's a judgment that we have to have toward our pastors or our leaders in the church. Like, there's a set standard in the Bible, but yet again, there's a difference between the set standard of here's the qualifications to be a pastor and the standard of here's the qualifications to be a believer. And so you have to differentiate where is their standard and where is there not. Mm-hmm. Where's their standard that I have to work with, and where's their standard that's up to God.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. It just reminds me of back in the day, like if you had a tattoo, that's a big no-no.
Now you are covered.
And you would be judged. You walk into church, and I think it even happens today. I mean, East Texas. I've heard it. I've heard people who have told me, look, my arms, all covered, and I'm just wondering how people are going to look. It's the look, right? It's the, it's like, you're not one of us. Mm-hmm. I don't think that you can find anywhere in the Bible where that's a sin per se, and yet culturally it has been for many years something that it's a big no, and so okay, good. That's a good. Anything else about judging? No. I think it's a hard question.
It is, yeah.
Like the question to go back, why would I want to go to a church full of hypocrites who look down on me?
That's where we started.
For my sins, all the while doing the same or worse. And I would say, you want to answer that, or?
Well, the thing that I would reiterate, and the thing above anything else, is that if you are someone who has a past, we all do. Right. But if you're someone who struggles from time to time of just even with people judging you, or even the feeling that your self-esteem is lower because of it, I'll just take you back to Romans 8:1. There is now, therefore, no condemnation. If you're in Christ, period. No condemnation.
Yeah.
There's nothing that a pastor can do. There's nothing that the deacon can do. There's nothing that anyone can do that can separate you from the love of Christ. And because of that, you are a child of God. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
That's good. Love it. Love it. I would also say don't lose hope. Don't lose hope, because sometimes the experiences of the past dictate what we do in the future, or even in the present. I know you've been through, you've walked this walk where you felt judged, and one of the things that I admire about you is that you didn't give up on church. You didn't give up on. I believe the church is the hope of the world, right? I believe it's up to us. Like I said on Sunday, we're plan A. God doesn't have a plan B. Like it's up to us to share the gospel with people and the message of redemption. And so I'm glad that you stepped into this church and you were able to find, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but relationships where you found love and you found grace. And so I hope that speaks to somebody, and we don't always get it right. I want to say that, we mess up a lot, but we do want to lead with grace. And
Yeah.
Good. Any other comments on that? No, we'll move on.
You can move on.
I think
I'm sure
you have something you want to say.
This topic is just such a near topic to my heart. Just this whole idea of having been through the ringer, having been through it, and I've said this a million times, both publicly and privately. Like I've been through the ringer not because of what other people did to me, but because of my own actions. Like I'll take full responsibility for what I did, but that doesn't change the process. That doesn't change the journey. That doesn't change the road. Just even again, like I said, I'll talk on this for hours, but we've got other topics. But to just to follow on that, like there is hope. Don't lose hope, and you're not alone.
Yes.
Like one of the things that I love about people when they're vulnerable and honest about where they are is that somebody is hearing them who is in that same spot. They're going, wait, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah.
You may not. It may take you a minute to find somebody else who's in the exact same spot, but I promise you they're there. And just finding the safe places to be vulnerable, to be real, you'll find them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, man. That's good. It takes a lot of courage to do that after you've been hurt one too many times. But yeah, hopefully that adds a little bit of value to people. All right. This one I kind of got into last Sunday. But I think it would be fascinating to hear your take. What should the church's role be in politics? So you guys want to talk politics?
Get it, Vivian.
Where to start? Because we have conversations about this. I have conversations about this often. This is something I have recently found myself to be fairly passionate about. I used to be the person that said, "Oh yeah, I just don't care about politics. I just don't want to get involved." That changed. And I think that changed when I started developing my own convictions about it. I just didn't get involved because I was like, oh, that's not my thing. But now I'm like, okay, let's go. Like, let's talk about this. Okay, where to start with this? I assembled, like, I have notes.
Well, if you see us looking at our phones, like I was looking at verses and other things too, like we're engaged.
Yeah, no, I have notes. I approach this kind of like a research paper because I'm like, this is I think this is an important topic, because we live in a weird time where the world is shifting, where it's very everything is readily available on social media, internet. We have access to information very quickly, and people have very quick responses about everything, and everyone feels like they need to have an opinion about every topic.
And then their opinion is judged, right?
Yeah. I have like some facts, some statistics.
Go for it.
That I want to say, and then we can maybe discuss it. So this is research that was taken from Pew Research. So it's nonpartisan. It's not, they're not either way. as far as politics go. But so the first statistic or fact is that the United States is the most Christian advanced democracy in the world. Even with declining rates of belief, like religious belief, and declining rates of church attendance, a solid supermajority of 65% of Americans identify as Christians. So that's the first fact. Second, both major parties depend on their religious bases. So Democrats are dependent on their non-white religious base, which, side note, have been studied and shown to be some of the most devout church-going people in the United States. And the Republican Party would practically be non-existent without its predominantly white evangelical base. So that's the second fact. Third fact, it can be agreed that American politics are a brutal landscape full of corruption, manipulation, toxicity, and hyperpartisanship. But if the previous points are true, then that should not be the case.
That's good.
If Jesus followers are the main voting base for both major parties, then why are we so divided and divisive? Let's see. We're at a point where Republicans and Democrats view the opposing party. They're not just in opposition with the party, but also with the people in that party, and they view them with a very negative light. The study shows that each party describes the other party as closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, and unintelligent. Both parties think this, which means that believers are thinking this about other believers, and we're thinking about, our fellow human beings in this way. So I think that is a very interesting starting point to be like, okay, this is our political landscape at the moment. And so when asked, like, okay, what's the church's role in politics? Well, currently, it doesn't seem like we're doing too hot. Currently, we're extremely divided, and that is causing a very, very, Christians are not the only people in America, right? 65%, that means that there's a whole other section of unbelievers, and yet, I think the church can cause a lot of division in our world, not just in our Christian world, but in the country as a whole. So those are some statistics, some facts about where we're at.
That's sad.
It is sad. And it's like, what do we do with that? And I don't know. I personally, something that's been really on my heart is looking at the extreme nature of some of the louder Christian voices in politics right now. We have a lot of not just politicians, but church leaders who are making really, really strong stances for at this point, they're the ones that I would be specifically wanting to draw attention to would be there's some really strong conservative voices that are claiming God and saying that we need to take back our country as a Christian nation. And we get a lot of talk of Christian nationalism and dominionism, which dominionism is defined as, this belief system that Christians are called by God to take dominion over all aspects of society. So politics, education, entertainment, the business world. I think there's I think there's a thing. It's like seven mountains of dominion or so. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but
I am of the belief that that is not biblical. The idea of Christians needing to come in and dominate every single portion of society. I look at Jesus and I'm like, he didn't do that. He didn't come in and try to...
They wanted to make him king.
They wanted to... Exactly. They wanted to make him king. They wanted him to become...
It would have been so easy.
They wanted him to become the empire.
Imagine if somebody existed today that had the power that Jesus had to heal, from a distance,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it wouldn't be believed because somebody on social media would disprove it.
Somebody would, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, Shane, any thoughts?
So many.
So many.
I guess my first statement is just of those things and of the things that you are saying, like that research is good. I'm listening to those facts for the first time, going, wow, that's staggering. I think my first thought even goes back to what you were discussing yesterday, which was on Sunday when you were talking about this, which was our response needs to be to pray, which I think is foundational. Like, I need to be praying more. I need to be seeking God more. I need to be, even as they say there after Solomon built the temple. I mean, God says, if my people who are called will humble themselves and pray, I'll heal their land. I mean, that's got to be the foundation. But then I think the thing that is so interesting, and this has been my process for a few weeks now, not just on politics, but in general. But if 65% of the American people are Christians, why is there so much disunity and division? And the more that I think on that, it goes back even to the Patriot days when we first took over America. And I mean, I remember in history class talking about propaganda, and really and truly, it's what it is. I mean, we have so much information that we have to choose what to believe. And so you've got right wing, left wing, middle, moderate, fill in the blank. I mean, there's so much information, but it goes back to, as a Christian, what should be my foundation? Well, I should be praying, asking God to reveal what is right and what is wrong. Well, He's revealed that to us in His Word, where He doesn't necessarily say specifically answers to all things, but He does give us general rules to approach them. But the thing that I go back to, and I made this comment with my small group a few weeks back, and basically it is that we live in a time where theology and biblical information is more at our disposal than any other time in history. But we also live in a time where we know so much less about what God has to say in His Word. And so if we don't have the foundation of seeking God and the foundation of knowing who God is, then we hear information and I go, ooh, that sounds good. Like,
that fits with my already preconceived notions of the world. I like it. It's true.
Exactly. And if I don't have a foundational base to start with, then what I hear that sounds good is going to be the thing. And then, I mean, I'm from Michigan, and I've been back and forth a bunch this year. The culture in Texas looks very different than the culture in Michigan. Well, everybody around me in Texas is a specific way. So I need to be that way too. My neighbor is this way. I'm this way. We're all this way. And so then it becomes a cultural, I am this way because the people that I'm around are this way, instead of having that foundation.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that the division that exists today, is it as intense as the media makes it out to be, or is it less? And it's just the media just kind of adding fuel to the fire.
Can it be both?
I'm curious. Like, do people really care?
Relative,
like, I know you said you care about this issue of politics, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's coming from a perspective like I care, but not like enough to where it's like I know people, and I won't say any names, but I know people that are very passionate about, Republicans or Democrats, okay? Yeah. But is this something that you think it's true of the country as a whole? Or is it something that maybe, the news is portraying?
I would say that, it depends on your specific area. I think there's probably some areas in the country that are more polarized than others. I do think, so maybe it's not as big as what the media portrays it to be, but I also think that is less important to focus on, because if it is as big as the media is putting it out to be, then that is the perception. So what is the perception becomes the reality in that point.
I watch the news, both conservative and liberal news, and I like to this is just my personal take. I like to watch a little bit of everything, intentionally. And the reason why I do that is because I feel like, at least with the news, I always feel like if I go to one source, I know exactly what I'm going to get. If I go to another source, I feel like I know what I'm going to say. And I'm hoping that the truth is somewhere in the middle, somewhere in all of these sources. But I've often wondered, like, are you need drama to capture an audience. And so if there's no tension, like, that's not gonna, the viewership is gonna go down. And so it's drama that grabs people's attention. And so I've often wondered, is this really as big of a deal as they're making it out to be? Or is it that an election is coming up and it's beneficial for this, this group of people to go down this line? And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Shane, any thoughts on that?
Nothing is ever done on accident. That's one of the things that I've learned over the years in leadership. So, like, even you talk about it's an election year, so you're gonna see CNN do one thing, Fox News do another thing, and it's all about the fact that it's being driven by donors, everything else. I will say there are some really great resources that kind of get you the grid where it's like far left, far right, opinion versus fact. There are some really great charts that kind of show some great news availability that just depends on, one, what you want, but also if you want something that is more unbiased, factual, there's some great resources out there. Side note, whatever.
Yeah.
But like I said, nothing is done unintentionally. I mean, you see it happen all the time in Washington, D.C., which is all of a sudden all our attention goes to a hurricane while in Congress they're making X, Y, and Z decision. I mean, nothing's unintentional. But one of the things that I think is really important here, I mean, you've made the comment a couple times, and Vivian said it as well. Vivian's very passionate about this subject of politics as a whole. When we start drilling down into specific elements, there are some elements that I'm very passionate about, and there are some elements that I'm like, that doesn't really affect me that much. And so is it as polarizing as the media makes it out to be? Sometimes, some places, but it's relative to where the passions are. And then I think it's also relative to how do we view each other, which a little bit goes back to that first question, is how do we view one another? If you hold X belief and I hold Y belief, do I think you are less of a person now because you hold that belief?
Right.
And once we make it about information and not about people, we miss it all together when it comes to Christians, because Christians should be all about the person and loving the person where they are.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Completely.
You know what? I may have mentioned this in church a while back. There was I was watching this clip of this particular person who's in politics, and I remember immediately making fun of the mistakes that they were making. In fact, I watched one last night on YouTube, and it just popped up, and it was like one clip after the next of all the mistakes that they had made. And didn't happen last night, but I remember a few months ago, I remember saying, oh my goodness, how can this person be in such a position, And immediately after I said that, and this is the reason why I preached on this last Sunday, immediately I felt like God said, your job is not to make fun of them, but to pray for them. Mm-hmm. And so along those lines, is there anything else that the church can do, and as it relates to this topic of politics, other than prayer? And I mentioned prayer, and that my main focus was that on Sunday. But are there any other things that you think is there ever a place where you can speak up? Is there ever a place where you can be strong? Is there ever a place where, and how much is too much? Mm-hmm. So any thoughts on that? And what can we, as a church, what can we do in politics?
Yeah.
And I'm going to follow that up with this. I'm just curious. What should a pastor's role be? Okay, so we'll do those two.
Yeah. Well, I have some verses about this, like, that are the way I think it's not just like, how we're supposed to be in politics, but how are we as Christians supposed to operate throughout life, because they are not two separate things. There's a concept, and I've seen this before in Christians, where it's like, well, we're supposed to do this. We're supposed to, love people and be like Jesus as a Christian. But for my politics, I have a little bit of a different stance, and, it becomes a little bit of a divided thing. They are not divided. The way that we operate in politics needs to be how we're supposed to operate in life, and in my estimation, in my opinion.
And if you have to separate them, then there's probably a problem.
There's probably a problem. There's probably something that you're trying to justify with your political party. Like, I found this in myself of like, okay, well, my political party tends to believe more like this, so I guess it's like, no, I might vote a specific way, but I'm gonna still hold the people that I vote for accountable to, to the things that I think are, right. And so some verses, let's see, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 says, "Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us."
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. "Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's servants. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God, and honor the emperor." Looking at Daniel in the Old Testament as...
Can I interrupt you real quick? You mentioned that word honor, and that's something that I really, since I come to Life Point, something that's really deep with the culture that I want to build in this church, and it's that we're a generation of honor. And I think you can honor a position that somebody has.
Yes.
And not necessarily agree with that person, not necessarily think that they're even the best person for the job. Could you read that one more time?
Yes. Let's see. "Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God, and honor the emperor."
And honor the emperor. How do you honor somebody that you don't agree with on some of the decisions that they're making?
Well, I think that there's we do need to hold our leaders accountable for things. Like, especially in America, we've got the privilege of being able to vote and have our voices heard in that way. And so I think we need to hold people accountable. So if they're doing things that are immoral or against the laws of the land, then they need to be held accountable for those things. But that also, but the honorings, that I think that honors the seat of power, and then we can honor people as, okay, it's like, I may not agree with you, but you are made in the image of God.
That was the first two words.
Yes.
It says respect others.
That's it.
Yes.
Respect and honor go hand in hand.
That's it.
Yes.
We have to respect and honor those in office, and we have to respect and honor those that we don't agree with.
Yeah, and I think our words, our attitude, words or attitude, are vital, because, even if you have the right words, you can still, your attitude shows that, man, just sort of a jerk personality attitude.
Sorry.
You know. But yeah, I think that even as we talk amongst Christians, you know, even if the people that you're having a conversation with agree with your political stance, I think we should be careful that we don't just, belittle, people that are maybe disagree with us and are in positions of authority. So I think that just speaks to the heart, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, something you said last podcast is like, hey, if you don't know what to do, just look to Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's something that we never see him, you know, talking trash about anybody. Even at the moment when he was being crucified, he could have said so many things about Pilate, how he didn't have a spine, and he was like, you know, he had no no courage, and but in that moment, I mean, the words that he spoke, in fact, actually, for the majority of the time, he was silent. But the few words that he did say were not against his character, you know. They were factual, and so sorry to interrupt you.
No,
Silence can never be miscommunicated.
Yeah.
So even in those moments when we're heated and we disagree, silence can never be taken to where I wanted to rip you all down, but instead being quiet. I mean, that's one of the things Jesus was so good at.
Yeah.
Is just
being silent.
Just being silent.
Yeah.
Taking
That's
a minute.
good.
I think an example of someone in the Bible rising in political power would be somebody like Daniel. So you look at Daniel, you preached a message on Daniel a while back, and you look at his life. He rose to power, not by lying or cheating the system, not by using and abusing others.
Yeah, or pulling people down.
Down.
As you're climbing up the ladder.
What he did, he saw a need, and he filled that need through the gifts that God gave him.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's good.
And
Say
so
that again?
The last part,
He saw a need and
he saw a need, he filled that need using the gifts that God gave him.
that's really good.
That's good.
That it's like, okay,
I mean, if we, I was going to say politicians, but I'm going to include myself in this equation because I think it's a humanity equation here. If we could do that, rather than name calling and picking nicknames and shaming people, I think we've gotten to such a place in politics that if you're not coming up with a nickname, if you're not coming up with a way to shame the other person, then you're missing out, you know. And I wish and I pray that we would have a leader that would rise to the occasion and really lead with integrity and by example. And I think it would probably be the biggest testament to Christianity. It would be the biggest thing, you know, if you can find a leader who's a hard worker, who has integrity, you know, we're never going to agree 100% with anybody,
right.
But that's what I would look for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
I completely agree. And I think as Christians, if we're looking for self-advancement, the advancement of our own status, that's a huge red flag. A huge red flag. Like if we are striving to be in control so that people can't control us, that is a huge danger. I heard there was an interview that was done by I think it was a Politico Magazine, I think is what it's called. But the head of he was affiliated with Focus on the Family. So that's a Christian organization started by James Dobson, you know, all that. He said, this was surrounding the election of Trump. And he said, Christians are tired of being kicked around by the left. And so he said, I think we're glad that somebody on the playground is willing to punch the bully. The interviewer said, what happened to turning the other cheek? He says, you know, you only have two cheeks. And then he says, Christianity is not all about being a welcome mat that people can stomp their feet on. So I heard that quote, And then I heard another quote in response to that, someone facetiously saying, we shouldn't always have to be the one on the cross. When do we get to crucify someone? And it's like, I think, and that particular quote was obviously talking about Trump, but I think this is applicable across the board. If we at any point are like, I'm tired of people, walking all over me. I'm tired, I want to be on the offense.
Yeah. I think you can be people want you to be on the offense, but not tearing down character.
But not tearing down people's character.
And for me, the offense is show me your plan, how you're going to make our country better. What, like, intellectually, show me what are, because I think voting has become, or maybe it's always been like this, I don't know, but a matter of personalities. If you're a charismatic individual, then people just seem to, it's like a popularity contest, and we've gotten away from what it should be, which is some of the needs of the country and the people, and so all right. So
but the problem is yes, we got personality, and then you have what I would call one issue voters. There's one issue and only one issue that matters to me. And either I'm voting for you because you're with me, or I'm voting against you because you're against me. And the problem with that becomes is there's a whole spectrum that we are dealing with.
Right.
Everything from economy to global affairs to border to social programs and entitlements and things of that nature, where it's like, I can't just vote on one thing. I've stayed quiet for a minute, but to go back to an initial question, like, I think it is so important as believers to know what we believe politically. And it goes back to what you said, and our political belief system has to be tied to our moral belief system. What does the Bible say? They should be intertwined, and those intertwinings do not just talk of one issue. It's knowing the full spectrum of the issues. And a lot of times we get that guy who's one issue, but he's with me, and everybody gets behind him because he's on that one issue, and he has absolutely no clue about anything else that's going on in the world, or in our area.
I like what you said. No, do a little bit of research, find out a little bit more than one issue.
And that doesn't mean that we're all going to come to the same conclusions either, because as we said earlier, we have this is something I'm really passionate about, but there are other people who are not, and that's okay. That doesn't make me worse or better than them. This is just something I'm passionate about, and I think that is applicable in politics. There are things politically that are influential to me, and I'm very passionate about that, so I'm going to fight for those things. Just because someone else isn't passionate about that specific thing, it's good. There's diversity in what people are passionate about. It's like, Daniel, he rose to power and it filled a need with the gifts that God gave him. So it's like, I have a specific perspective on some things that I'm passionate about, and you have things that you're passionate about. And so theoretically, as a functioning body, the body of Christ, right, we have different purposes, and hopefully we can work together, even if that means that we fall on different sides of the political aisle. That doesn't necessarily have to matter when we're working towards a common goal of loving each other and taking care of each other. And maybe our ways of doing it is different, but that's okay, because it means that more will be covered.
Yeah.
Rather than focusing on one specific way to do it.
Are there specific political ideas that as believers we should be unified on?
Ask the question again. Are there?
So we've asked the question, should Christians be loud when it comes to political issues? We've also made the statement that you can be a Christian and hold different views, and that's okay, and we should love one another. But are there political ideas that we should be unified as believers?
I think I'm sure there are. But then they can be subjective too, right? So I'll give you my opinion.
It's a hard question.
But it's a phenomenal question. But what I have to understand is that these are mine, and they may not be yours.
Yeah.
And so, you're going to talk about marriage, what the definition of marriage. You can talk about the whole idea with abortion. I think that's pretty hot right now. You can talk about the role of government. How much power should they have? And so I think what the challenge is, where the communications break down and we begin to yell at each other and we begin to attack each other. I think that's where we lose. We all lose. Nobody wins.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have a thought about that. So a verse that comes to mind, and I completely agree with you. It's very subjective as to I do think that there's some things that Christians need to be unified on, but I don't know if other people agree with me.
right.
So
we need to be unified, but
I don't know about what. So in James 2, verse 15 and 16, it says, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it?"
Right.
So that's a whole chapter that talks about pure and undefiled religion and what is religion in God's eyes and how we're supposed to treat people. And it's like, what good is it if we see people in need and we're like, "Oh, I don't want you to be in need anymore. Thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
Peace out."
Yeah.
And then it's like, well,
yeah.
And
what is up with that?
And are we going to stand? And this is me getting passionate, and this is my personal belief system. It's like, are we going to stand in the way of policies and legislation that would help the poor and the needy and the widow and the orphan just because it doesn't quite line up with our political affiliation?
Right.
Like that's what ended up getting me very passionate about politics in the first place. It's like, oh yeah, I want people to be taken care of, but if I have to vote this way, because if I don't vote, if I vote a different way, then that's,
So
I don't know.
So a challenging question would be, is that the role of the government, right?
Sure.
Because I feel like that's
where my brain was going.
That's the next question.
Where I would come in and say, well, if the church was doing what it should be doing.
Is the church doing it?
65% of Americans are Christians. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing?
Right. And so
we have the most intense poverty level in a developed country,
right,
in the world. Like the percentage of children in our country that go hungry every single day is astronomically higher than it should be for a country of our developed status. And so it's like, okay, the church, yeah, in an ideal world, 100% the church should be doing this. But the church is not doing this.
Right.
The church is answering the questions that nobody is asking.
There you go.
That's it. Boom.
And so then what do we do as individuals? I'm not a pastor. I mean, I work at a church. But what do I do as an individual? I can't reach everybody in my community. I can't feed every person or take care of everyone. But I can check a box on a ballot to potentially put leaders in charge that could help with that. So, I mean, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. I would love it if the church would step up and do more.
I think it's a matter of heart. And again, I'm trying to wrap it up, but we can go another hour. We can go another hour on this one, but I think it's a matter of heart. I think we can talk about, is this the government's role or not? And then we can also talk about, so when somebody's in need, what is the proper way to love them and to help them, and you read that verse in James, right?
Yes.
But you can go to Acts where Peter walks up to the temple and there's a beggar and Peter says, "I don't have any money for you, but what I do have, I give you," and he prays for him.
Yeah.
And so lots of good questions, lots of challenging ways to address the issue. I think the core of it is when our heart is about us and how I can gain more political influence and how I can get ahead rather than the heart of the people. Yeah. And so I think those are there's so many different ways to achieve the same thing. And yet if we lose heart, for the people, I think that that's when we get in trouble. Last question. which I asked earlier. What role should I play as a pastor? So how much is
You're
too
going
much?
to tell me how to vote, right? Right from the stage, tell me how to
can,
vote.
if you want me to.
I don't recommend that.
So
I don't.
I'm more than glad to do that. You know, I've told you more than just voted.
Alex is not afraid to tell me anything, but that's in private.
Yeah.
How much is too much for a pastor?
Shortly after I moved to Texas, 2007, going to 2008, I think it was the McCain and Obama election, the first time Obama won. The very first Sunday I went to church, I was told who to vote for from the stage. There were a group of 12 of us that were working.
So this is a real thing. You brought this up recently.
Yeah.
I think, was it the last podcast or was that somewhere else? You mentioned it to me. I'm like, I'm so that.
It was a private conversation that we had a couple months ago. Yeah.
I'm just blown away that you're telling the same story that Vivian just told me.
Of the 12 people who worked for a Christian organization from all over the world that visited that church that Sunday, I think 2 ever went back ever again.
Mm-hmm. You say that again?
Of the 12 people who visited that church, we were in a group. There were 12,
okay. I got
There were 12 of us. We all worked for the same organization. We had all just moved to East Texas. I think maybe 2 of us were familiar with the area. The rest of us were from all over the country.
2 of them went back.
Of the 12 of us, 10 of us said, no, this is not where I want to be. I think 2, I've never visited the church again.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I know people who go there. I know people who are on staff there. I know their hearts, and I'm like, man, I know their hearts. But to me,
so what you're saying is I shouldn't mention names. I shouldn't tell you who to vote for.
I do not believe it is my pastor's responsibility to tell me who to vote for. I think it's my pastor's responsibility to teach me who God is, and the thoughts of who God is, going to the love conversation of how are we loving the poor, the orphan, the widow.
Right.
If I am being taught at church by my church leaders what the Bible says, then 2 things are happening. One, the church is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so maybe that question of is it the government's responsibility might go away. That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is that as individuals, we know, we have information. I can then go to the voting booth knowing this is the truth of what God has to say, whether it be the places that are gray or the places that are black and white, whether it be the places that even in the Bible we can disagree on topics, or the places where God's very clear, do not commit murder.
Yeah.
I can go to the voting box with this foundation and say, okay, because of this foundation, this is who I want to get behind to see our country move forward.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, I would say a pastor's job is not to tell people how they're supposed to think. It's to equip
that's good.
people.
I like that.
It's to equip people to think.
Yeah.
And to process and to look at things critically and to understand God's heart.
Yes.
And so
that's really good, Vivian. Some of the best seminary teachers that I had would give us 3, 4, 5 different views on a particular theology or in doctrine. And they would say, okay, these group of people, here's what they believe. This group of people, here's what throughout history, this is what people have believed.
Yes.
In this culture, this is what, and then at the end, he would basically say, hey, my lean is towards this, but at the end of the day, he always left it up to us. And I really enjoy those teachers because there was freedom,
yes.
and
Yes.
so I love that you mentioned that. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, last word. Any last words?
I think the verse 1 Corinthians 13 verse.
Did you read my notes?
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to jump in there, but so 8. I think it's verses 8 through 13 approximately. It's like where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. And now these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. So when talking about government or anything in life, what is the law of God's kingdom? Love.
That's it.
Everything else will pass away. Love will not.
Remain.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that I've been learning, going hand in hand with that knowing God and all of those things over the last few months, has been one of the most eye-opening things to me. I don't know why. maybe everybody listening goes, yeah, of course, Shane. But 1 Corinthians 13, where do you hear it? Weddings. So 1 Corinthians 13 is talking about love between a husband and a wife and a marriage and all these things. And there is a lot of validity to that, because the definition of love that comes in 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient and kind, doesn't boast, doesn't envy, all those things are things that should be in a marriage relationship. But in the context of 1 Corinthians, Paul is writing to the church. 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Corinthians 10 talks about how whatever we're doing, it should be to God's glory.
Yes.
That's where it starts, right? And then it continues on, and there's a whole bunch in there that I won't get into, but it continues on to then 13, where it talks about how we ought to love each other. So God calls us to do two things: love God, love people. So if we have this foundation of love will always be there. Who are we loving? I think it's our primary responsibility to love God and know God and have an understanding of who He is, so that we can love people. And that the way that we love people is the way that He loved us. And greater love has no one than this, and He laid down His life for His friends. I mean, when it comes to this whole idea of politics, some people are laying down their life for the friends that are around them. Like, let's love one another with that sacrificial love, even as we know more about who God is and what He's called us to.
Yeah, and the mission is the same. We've talked about this. The mission does not change. The method might change.
That's right.
But the mission is the same.
That's it.
So I think that's solid.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great job. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. More than that, we hope you feel encouraged to have conversations with people in your life about potentially difficult topics. Also, it's never too late to send in a question. Text us your questions to 903-592-8357. Thanks for listening.